One of the most prolific online child abusers has been sentenced to life in prison. Alexander McCartney from County Armagh in Northern Ireland faked his identity to sexually abuse and blackmail thousands of children online. Well, the judge at Belfast Crown Court said McCartney used social media on an industrial scale to inflict terrible and catastrophic damage on young girls across the world. Well, police believe thousands of children were targeted, with many victims never identified. Before sentencing today, McCartney, who is 26, pleaded guilty to 185 charges. Well, those charges involved 70 victims aged between 10 and 16 in New Zealand and in the United States. My colleague Chris Page has the details.
Simran Thomas lived thousands of miles away from the abuser who caused her death.
Why? Why was the biggest question. Why? This is the Sunday we took her home before her passing. She has bright red lipstick on, getting into that stage of her life. To be a teenager, she almost was.
Alexander McCartney was blackmailing Simran. He had initially pretended to be a teenage girl to trick Simran into sending him explicit pictures of herself. He went through the same sickening routine with 3,500 victims, telling them he would post the photos publicly unless they carried out acts of abuse for his sexual gratification. 3 minutes after McCartney's last message to Simran, the emergency services received this call.
What happened? She fell, shot herself. Yeah, get her to get rags, put pressure on that, control the bleeding as much as you can. I need to secure the firearm. Is it close by?
18 months later, Simran's father, Ben, took his own life without knowing what had led to his daughter's suicide. Police and prosecutors on both sides of the Atlantic worked to bring the manslaughter charge. McCartney targeted victims across the world over 5 years. He ordered some girls to film themselves abusing other children.
You had little girls, sort of an average age of 10 to 12 years old, many times, being threatened in the most depraved way. When he got that first photograph from them, he actually had a pre-prepared threat saved in his phone, which he would cut and paste into the chat. His offending was round the clock, and it was difficult to know when he actually did anything else.
A number of victims were in New Zealand. One father said his family had been devastated.
It all happened for my daughter within minutes. As soon as that first photo was sent, a sequence of events was in motion that, could never be undone. And he'd obviously honed his craft over, a significant period of time. And as soon as he had that power, she was playing by his rules.
McCartney is now facing justice with a life prison sentence. The judge said the full extent of McCartney's crimes put the case on a par with murder. He told the court he couldn't imagine a more dangerous sex offender. The detective leading the inquiry said there'd never been an investigation like it.
His offending was on an industrial scale. McCartney's actions have directly caused the death of a child. He may as well have pulled the trigger himself.
McCartney must serve at least 20 years before he can apply for early release. The online killer is one of the most prolific child abusers ever to be convicted. Chris Page, BBC News, Belfast.
Well, let's cross live now and speak to our tech correspondent, Graham Fraser. And Graham, just bring us up to date with what Snapchat have had to say following this case.
Well, as we were hearing from Chris's report there, McCartney's horrible crimes had social media at their heart, in particular Snapchat, an app which will be popular for many people watching at home, and it's also a very popular app for many young people. Now, what McCartney was doing was he was pretending to be a girl on Snapchat, and he was finding girls and then he was flattering them, and he was getting compromising photographs of them, and then he used them to blackmail and threaten the children, with the offences taking place between 2013 and 2019. Now, as you say, Snapchat have released a statement following the sentencing today. It says, "The sexual exploitation of any person is horrific and illegal, and our hearts go out to the victims in this case." If we discover this activity or it is reported to us, we remove it, lock the violating account and report it to the authorities. We have extra protections for teens to make it difficult for them to be contacted by strangers, and we have expanded in-app notifications to ensure teens are in touch with people they trust. The statement concluded, through our in-app family centre, parents can also see who their teens are talking to and who their friends are.
And give us a little bit more detail, Graham, if you can, about what social media companies are actually doing to protect young people in these circumstances now. What have they been saying?
I think when we talk about online safety today, it's good to focus on two areas. First, what the companies themselves are doing, and second, the legislation that governments and other authorities are bringing in to tackle some of the issues that we've been talking about today. So if we talk about the social media companies first, I'm sure if they were here with us right now, they would tell us about all the features that exist already on their apps, on their platforms to keep children safe. In the last few months, there has been a few more added to certain platforms. For instance, one of the major ones was Instagram. They introduced something called teen accounts. This particularly affected people aged between 13 and 15 and made the accounts private by default. And that means that people who don't follow them wouldn't be able to see their content. It also gave parents quite a lot of ability to control those apps. The second thing that Instagram released, it was just last week, was a feature to try and tackle sexploitation. In particular, it was stopping people being able to screenshot images in the app that were only designed to be seen once. So that's a flavour of some of the things that some of the social media companies are doing. But one of the big things, I think, is the Online Safety Act, which in the UK is coming in next year. This will put the onus on the platforms to do much more to tackle illegal content.
Graham, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's now speak to Andy Burrows, who's Chief Executive of the Molly Rose Foundation. It's a charity set up following the death of the schoolgirl Molly Russell, who took her own life after viewing harmful content online. And Andy, I'm very grateful to you for taking the time to speak to us. And if I may ask you, first of all, for your reaction to the sentencing and indeed to this case.
Evening, Mariam. Well, this is a really appalling case, and whilst it's not surprising, it is nonetheless deeply shocking to see just the sheer scale of this man's grooming of children right around the world. I think the sentencing today is really important, not only because a life sentence has been rightly imposed, but because of the manslaughter conviction that was brought about in this case. And I think that's really important because that should send a very clear message to child sexual abusers and to those who wish to harm children across a whole range of ways online, that in this case, with the death of Simran Thomas, there is a direct link between what was taking place online and then the culpability for the events that led to the loss of her life.
Talk me through a little bit about what needs to be done now, do you think, to prevent cases like this being able to run and run in the way this has for years?
Well, Graham was setting out there some of what the social media platforms claim that they're doing, but the reality is that most of the major platforms, at best, what we see from them is piecemeal action in response to tragedies. Most of the companies have failed to invest in safety upfront by design. They've turned a blind eye to the range of safety risks. And as a result, we see child sexual abuse every year hit new record levels. Here in the UK, we see a child aged 10 to 19 die by suicide every single week, where there is a technology aspect to those cases. There is so much more that technology platforms could do to detect and disrupt harm before it even happens, because we're talking here, Mariam, about preventable harm. We shouldn't be fatalistic about this. The platforms can do so much more to step in and intervene.
Andy, good to talk to you. Thanks again.